I know it's 10 o'clock and everybody has busy schedules, and I don't want to try to mess everybody's schedule up, so we'll try to get everything rolling and going. I appreciate everyone continuing to be here. On behalf of the county, thanks again to the city for lining up the location. You guys have done a fantastic job, so we appreciate it. I know we've discussed right at the beginning as we walked in about trying to do the order. We drew numbers last time for the order of presentations, but we also understand that the Board of Commissioners didn't present a full presentation in terms of their stance all the way through. So I believe we agreed that the county would go first, so that way the city can respond as we go through there. So with that in mind, we'll dive right in if y'all are good to go. First and foremost, I want to say that as we go through this presentation today, all of the different things that we say in response to a stance or anything like that is based on the consultant's presentation that was made last week. There's not been any conversations between us and the City of Jasper, with us and talking around. I did speak with Sylvia one time, but we didn't talk about this. So there's not been conversations. We're not basing this off of sidebar conversations. It's 100%. And I think you'll see that as we go through the reference to the different slides and material that we go through as we go. If by chance somebody's here that wasn't here last week, we do still have copies of the presentation that was made last week that we brought as well, so that we can provide those if needed. So, but in essence, today we're going to go over the BOC's, the Board of Commissioners' position in service delivery on lost and service delivery. Restating our position and our objective from last week, we're looking for a comprehensive solution that best meets the needs of all 34,000 residents, incorporated and unincorporated. We're also looking at a comprehensive solution that's an integrated two-part reset, for lack of a better word, to look at our service delivery strategy that's currently in place, and to look at what's in the best interest, again, of the totality of the citizens. That's based on our service delivery strategy, loss continuation, and distribution of the percentages that go through there. Taking those again, service delivery, we can't reiterate enough, we believe, is one of the key elements that we've got to take a look at in the loss continuation and distribution. Service delivery strategy, the latest, was filed in 2018. If you've had a chance to go on, you can look on the DCA's site. Georgia DCA site shows that presentation. You can see all of the past filings. And in there you'll see that there are holes, that there are lacking areas. There's only one IGA that's referenced in our service delivery strategy. So as we go through those IGAs and look at them, we think that there is a need. I don't believe our current Board of Commissioners would have presented that strategy if it were presented today. It was put in place in 2018. Also, the lost distribution certificate that was filed was in 2011. For those that aren't familiar, this has to be done on every 10-year process within 2 years of the latest census is the word I'm trying to think of the latest census. So that's where we are today, coming back through. Our position is defined by 4 factors when we look through. One's our philosophy, our approach, focal points, and the objective. I think that those 4 are the approaches that we're trying to take in coming up with a fair process for all 34,000 citizens. When we look at our philosophy, that drives an objective. It also drives our approaches, and our approaches drive our focal points, which can refer back to our objective. Why is this important? Why are those particular things? Because the BOC's philosophy, the county's philosophy, starkly differs from the consultant's presentation that was made last week. If we look deeper, our BOC's approach starkly differs from the presentation that was made from the consultant last week. Our focal points starkly differ. And then that takes us on to our objective, we believe, starkly different. And that's what's kind of led us here today to make this presentation. We believe there's a continental divide between the Board of Commissioners' stance and philosophy and approach and what was presented last week by the consultant in those different categories. We believe that there's a huge gap that's between there, and we hope to be able to show that today as to how it is so that when we can get this engaged and go forward. We're going to continue to work diligently, gathering data and analyzing it, continuing to listen to feedback from constituents and citizens, analyzing all the data from peer counties. We're not the only county doing this right now, so it's happening in 159 counties. and engaging in a good faith discussion with all citizens. So what we're going to do is to try to go through the drill down in this perspective. We've asked our Director of Administrative Operations if he can come up. He's going to go through and try to drill down the data. Bill Wood's been approached. I've met with him, obviously. We work together on a regular basis, but Bill's also had an opportunity to meet with the remaining members of the Board of Commissioners and go through, and this philosophy we believe represents each member of the Board of Commissioners. So Bill's going to go through and do a drill down as we go through the rest of this presentation and present the rest of the county's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Drill down on the BOC's proposed solution. Chris gave the high-level overview of this, and it's one that we put a lot of thought in and a lot of analysis in as we basically form the perspectives and the components of the solution that we'll be presenting to everybody today. The drill down, we're going to look at loss fundamentals in the solution framework. We're going to look at services. And that's basically part one of the BOC solution, which is a fixed service delivery situation. Contrasting approaches, which is basically going to segue into the tax piece of this, which is the best tax outcome for all citizens, which is part two and the final part of the BOC's proposed solution. We would welcome, if anyone has any case law that would alter the way that that might be in the computations. I want to reiterate what Chris said about the reaction that we basically have to the overall situation is there have been no substantive discussions. We're not reacting in any way to anything that we have heard or seen from any of the city elected officials or employees. And we have the highest regard and level of respect for everybody in the cities. And we're hoping that as we work through this situation, that level of respect is reciprocal and we'll be able to really get a lot accomplished for the people here and do the most we can for the taxes they pay us, because that's really what all this is all about. If we look at services and we look at taxes, it's the highest level of government at any level. Basically collecting taxes, as little taxes as possible, to provide maximum services in terms of quality and scope and quantity. And that's really what's got to be kept in mind, all this. This continental divide that Chris mentioned, I think that if that's a misperception on the BOC's and the county's part, and the next 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks prove that to be a misperception, I think there'll be a lot of folks that are happy because it'll be to the benefit of the citizens here, and we'll be amongst those folks that are happy. So just basically wanted to set everything up with that. Loss fundamentals in the solution framework. This will be somewhat of a review from some of the items that the consultant and Chris presented last week, but it's important to keep them in the back of their mind. And we basically tried to skinny these up and bundle them in a different way to streamline them. We have our 8 criteria that were discussed. Have to consider all criteria, but do not have to use all. Inextricably linked to service delivery. Mentioned 6 out of 8 of the criteria, 4 directly, 2 indirectly. Flexibility. Criteria overlap between the 8. There's no formula. List is not exclusive. Criteria is not weighted. Criteria not prioritized. Specific measures of criteria not mandated. And no prohibition on collateral agreements. Which means that for the good of the citizens of the county, to maximize the quality of the services that we all provide for the least amount of money, we can throw anything into this pot and talk about it, try to get it done literally at any time. It's just that because loss is here, it's a great opportunity to look at a lot of this stuff. Why would the General Assembly just provide guidance as opposed to mandate this stuff? Why is the General Assembly's guidance so flexible? Maybe it's because each of the 159 counties in Georgia has a truly unique situation in terms of the specific combination of the specific needs, desires, and viewpoints of its residents, because they will govern what we do, including how this is handled. And this is basically in the face, as decision makers have to face the potential discontinuation of loss. That is the one penalty that we have that will negatively affect a whole lot of people, not necessarily everybody, but a whole lot of people. And that's really the incentive to try to reach an agreement, as opposed to being sued over it or things like that. That's basically it. And just to review a couple of things that Chris showed last week, as decision makers face the potential discontinuation of loss, in this county, what happens is there would then now be 53 counties that impose a 7% tax rate, with Pickens dropping out of that. There would now be 5 counties that impose a 6% tax rate, with Pickens joining that group. And that would basically be all of the existing taxes except for the loss, which would go away. The mechanics here that make this a tricky exercise is the fact that while the sales taxes go down, the property taxes go up by way of a rollback term that's thrown around, which is basically a deduction from the property taxes that's equivalent to loss. So you've got some equivalency there, but there's going to be winners and losers as that's applied because of that tax burden shift from from the property owners, away from the property owners to residents and visitors. So, as we said last week, it's the BOC's position, and it's probably the highest objective that we've got into this, at least in terms of the resolution part of it, is to try to avoid this at all costs. This is important to restate. We've got 2 parts to the solution: fixed service delivery situation, best outcome for all citizens. That's tax outcome for all citizens. We basically want to make sure that, at least on our side, that we're comprehensive, fair, and balanced as it relates to this. So this is half of the foundation underlying this, and then that there's an accurate property tax rollback outcome, and that basically means the rollback of law of the property taxes for the sales tax reduction of 1% for loss. Fixed service delivery situation. We define that at the highest level as a process to collaborate to comprehensively fix the service delivery situation by a specified date. And what that means is new and amended IGAs and service area maps and an amended SDS that follows that service delivery strategy. Now, Chris used that term for folks that probably everybody in here has heard of it, but there might be only a portion of the audience that's actually worked on this. They don't come around on the whole except for every 10 years, although they can be, it should be by law amended when there are changes in the service delivery situation. Service delivery strategy to a layperson, because I was a layperson when I first heard this, service delivery strategy to a layperson sounds like something that would be inside an organization, an approach that an organization would basically develop and deploy to execute their services and deliver their services. That's not exactly what it is by the O.C.G.A. in Georgia. Basically what it is a filing requirement every 10 years and then on changes, whereby local governments identify the services, identify who provides the services, identify the funding sources, and identify the agreements, any agreements between the local governments that are providing the services, and that will be any kind of an agreement whatsoever. Best tax outcome for all citizens. The right loss distribution formula with the distribution percentages for Nelson, Talking Rock, Jasper, and the county. And that's a full optimized property tax rollback. Board of Commissioners' view of that is that is fully optimized considering all policies and all citizens. You know, we have individual citizens living within the respective jurisdictions. All of them live in the county. There are differing policies and points of view from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. They've all got to be accommodated and fairly funded. We had a little bit about that from the consultant last week, coming at it from a different perspective than you're going to see today. All right, let's start with the services. Fixed service delivery situation. What has to be fixed? Intergovernmental agreements. Basically, there needs to be an effort to find out what we've got. Are they fresh? What do we need that should reflect what we're actually doing with each other that don't have a formal agreement? And basically situations, by doing this, we might find areas whereby we should be working together when we shouldn't, and there should be an IGA. So the payoff on this is multifold. Service area maps. The water map is something that I know Philip Dean is very keen to revisit. Tax inequities, we heard about this last week. And one of the components of the consultant's presentation dealt with that. And then there's a service delivery strategy that would be amended after working on all of those things. The fix, said it before, from a county standpoint, is committing to and executing a process to comprehensively fix the situation. That means those things that we noted before. And the collaborative comprehensive process is those. This is a predicate. This is really, really important to the Board of Commissioners, is to be able to deal with this as soon as possible and really in conjunction with the tax side of the situation. They're just inextricably related. Contrast. Okay. Again, this is basically the reaction that we got from that we had, and it's one of the first things that we talked about when we debriefed after we got back, which is the one of the points that the consultant made, whereby this frame was used. Intergovernmental agreements are reflected in the service delivery strategies. Service delivery strategy has recently been approved by all parties. Loss law preceded on SDS law by many years. We will stand to be corrected on this, but the way we took that is that the intergovernmental agreements are in place. They're reflected in the service delivery strategy. The service delivery strategy has been filed. Don't worry about it. Move on for another 6 years. We don't know why in the world this particular viewpoint would be, that's what it says. We don't know why in the world this particular viewpoint would be expressed in the Pickens situation. This is all 5 documents Pickens County has filed with the Department of Community Affairs. There's 112 pages of this in total, 105, 2 full-fledged service delivery agreements. Contrary to what the form requires, and the law requires, there's not a single IGA listed in here. Chris mentioned one that was mentioned, but it was one that actually, between the parties, to actually file this. And it's not even listed or included. Just for an example of contrast, and I'll explain why I pulled this one. This is Greene County's. So it's 112 pages. This is Greene County, just for 2018. It's a county of just a few over 20,000 people. It's 92 pages. The difference is there's 4 pages to a page here. Most of these service delivery agreements from county to county usually include 40 to 50 services that are listed that are provided by somebody or both parties. That's the case with these two as well. There's almost 30 IGAs in this one. None here. Now, our point is, because of the multi-dimensional payoff that we would get going through this exercise, to basically fix this would tell us what IGAs we need that we don't have, which ones that we do have are current, fresh, and accurate, and it would help us collaborate on what we need to do together to create new situations. That's why this is imperative to the Board of Commissioners. There's an element in this. And we just basically don't understand how this reference could be made if someone looked at the actual documents that Pickens County filed with the Department of Community Affairs. Now, we'll leave it at that for now. So we have questions. All right, versus refreshing the existing IGAs, creating new IGAs, updating service area maps, fixing tax inequities, and then we get to the amended SDS on the back of that. Does this mean that the Board of Commissioners would want to complete all this work before the tax side of this is agreed to? No, because we don't think that's feasible. But what we could do is actually agree to do it, set a date, set a process, agree to the process in the form of an IGA, and basically get to work on it. So I guess what we're saying is a predicate, doing this and committing to do it is a predicate for the deal, not actually having it all done at one time. This is a lot of work, a whole lot of work, but this will pay dividends beyond belief to basically do this. And it's a great opportunity to do it. Great time. So, fixing the tax inequities. I guess, let me back up. This was also presented. There was a tax equity, and he called it tax equity analysis, which is a tax inequity, basically a component of the loss percentage. We understand what the consultant's trying to do here. Some of us have seen this before, not in a loss context, but we've seen it before in Cherokee on service delivery situations. So this is nothing new to some of us. We're going to make a case here over the next couple of minutes as to why this is not the side of the equation that the loss distribution process is not the side of the house to do this on. It's the service delivery side of the house that needs to be done. And we'll get to that. All right, there's the equity analysis. We went through this in detail. We're not going to basically drag us in the weeds today about this. As I said, we understand what's going on. We do have some issues with it, and we understand that y'all would know we would, and we know y'all are going to have issues on what we present today. But this isn't fixed. Because in a situation requiring an SDS redo, and that's exactly what we've got here, is a situation that requires an SDS redo. The fix is what we talked about before, and I'm not going to read it again, but the fix would be correcting tax inequities. We believe tax inequities do exist, and they probably exist on both sides. So we can really get to the bottom of this with a lot of work done in the arena that it should be done in. And that's the comprehensive collaboration. Now, why do we feel confident that SDS eclipses loss as a mechanism or the tool to rectify tax inequities? The more powerful tool to address service delivery problems is why. The county is required by the Georgia General Assembly to file an SDS. 159 out of 159. Counties required to impose a loss. 0 out of 159. That tells us what the General Assembly is thinking with regard to the better tool to address tax inequity situation. Yes, the 8 criteria do mention that in spots. And that might be the case in terms of a situation that doesn't need the SDS overhaul. Now, you say that because everybody on the BOC side, and I think most of y'all too, a lot of people here, it's new. I mean, this is an inherent situation. So this is something that those that have inherited this can get together and fix. So we say SDS is a vastly superior tool to address that service delivery problems. And the solution is a fixed service delivery situation. Ultimately, that's going to make, no matter how the rollback spreads out, in the intermediate term and the long term, this is going to make more difference to the people of Pickens County. It's going to make bigger difference to every city. It's going to make a bigger difference to the Board of Commissioners. And again, we question that. Contrasting approaches. This is a little bit of a drill down on what Chris alluded to about the consultant. We just, we kept thinking about this and thinking about this and thinking about it, and we just basically couldn't come up with a different point of view, even though we tried. And if we're proven wrong on this, that would be great for everybody. And it's between the BOC and the consultant, not with anybody in here, because nobody in here has talked to us. Nobody in here has given us any materials or anything like that. Okay. We looked at basically what was presented. It was basically a product that had 3 tiers: the application of the law, compiled and merged data, and the positions that were in it. Because we're really, really keen on having the service delivery piece of this addressed as the essential component, we have a problem with the approach and the scope. We have issues also in all 3 tiers running up and down the tiers. That's not to say that we don't agree with everything in there. It's just that we've got issues running up and down all the tiers, from the application of the law to the compilation and the merging of the data, and then the positions that result from those 2 things. So the first thing, and this is the first thing that came to mind in the debriefing when we got back. This represents a number. It's a number sign. A position to drive a number. A number and a number. There was a question asked. It was not by an elected official. It was not by an employee. It was by somebody else. When Chris got finished, well, what's your number? There was something said after the meeting, not by an elected official, not by an employee, that says, well, why can't you give us a number? How can you negotiate in good faith without a number? It's about a number. We're not about a number. We're about the right number. And the right number could be anything. It's about the methodology and the objectives and those 4 things that Chris talked about. Okay, we do not want to get into a situation on the BOC side where we've got dueling numbers. Our number versus their number. Which party can make the other party come closer to its number? That's what that's all about. That's not about policy. And again, I apologize if we've gone over. This is just how we've had it. And Mary Green was exposed to this. I'll use an example. When a county like Cherokee is dealing with Motorola on buying an 800 megahertz public safety radio system, this is absolutely the right thing to do. It is the county's number versus the vendor's number. And it should be. That's what people expect. We don't think that's the appropriate way to approach intergovernmental situations, even though at the end of the line, in many of these, there always will be a number. So, the BOC's position. Let's think of constituents first. Citizens renamed, fixing the service delivery situation, producing the best tax outcome for all. To have a solution, 2-part solution. And this is from the BOC standpoint. Others will have a different viewpoint. To not unduly subsidize high-density growth. The other side of that equation would be to get a correct number to support our policy, which may have some viewpoint that's different than the county's on that. And that's fine. But it's the balance that the BOC is looking for. Our position is driven on data, documents, current facts and circumstances, and historical facts, and the current historical context. So we see it truly as what was presented, not necessarily what you all embody, but what was presented was a position to drive a number, whereas the BOC is looking for a broader approach that will take us to the number in a better context. BOC, all of you have told me we are not going to engage in an intergovernmental situation on numbers versus numbers. we will fully engage on this or something like this, that will produce a number, but it'll produce a whole lot more than a number. All right, let's get to the taxes. I mean, there's going to be a long way we're going to have to go with this one, but fixing the service delivery side of the house will help get us to the right answer on this. We've got our principles. We've got the solution that we've already stated. We looked at property tax rates and burdens in Pickens County to provide some context on this. These numbers might not mean a lot to some people, but these numbers mean a lot to the board of commissioners and for us as the staff. I mean, once we started looking into this, it just stays in our mind. We can be disabused of that it shouldn't be in the forefront of our mind, but it is. We look at the property tax rates in the county in Jasper. We look at property tax rollbacks in the county in Jasper, which is where the loss comes in terms of the rollback and the equivalency of the deduction, and the property tax burdens in the county in Jasper. The reason we're going through this again is so we can understand what is in our minds as we try to decide how we move forward for the betterment of everybody in this county. This is a snapshot of Pickens County Notice of the Tax Digest 5-year history of the levy. We're basically using this because it's where a lot of the information comes from. Every city has one. We used every other cities as well. So basically what this thing does at the highest, most simplified level is it calculates the gross tax rate. You subtract the rollback, you produce a net tax rate. So that's what's applied to the value of the property that Rowan and his folks have basically appraised. The subtracting the rollback is where the loss comes from. And that's the form says that. Here's a generic example. If somebody has a simple 5% gross rate at the very top, and then there's a rollback for the local option sales tax that's 1%, then the net tax rate is going to be 4%. Very simple. Now, if a jurisdiction, because of this process or something else, is basically gets a double loss allocation, what happens is they go from 1 to 2 on the reduction, and they go from 4 to 3 on the net tax rate that will be applied to property values. Here's some instructive comparisons, and this is what's in our mind. And we'll look forward to dialogue and basically y'all helping us understand why we shouldn't put so much weight to this. But without conversation, we just wanted to share it. All right, so if you look at, and this is all coming from 2021. If you look at Jasper County's gross millage rate, Jasper to the county gross millage rates, this is at the very top without loss rollback. We're at 11.437 to 10.1898. That's the starting point. If we look at the rollback rate, this is what's reduced from that because of the loss transfers and distribution. We're looking at 5.879 to 2.708. So while the gross ratio of Jasper to the county is 112%, the rollback comparison is 217.7%. All right, so then you get to basically the levy rate, 5.58 versus 7.489, and it's 74.2%. So how does one go from 112% to 74.2% with a 217% difference in the rollback? So if we look at percentage of the rollback to the gross millage rate, we've got 51% versus 26.6%. That's the percentage of the rollback, the deduction to the gross millage rate, and then the percentage of the rollback rate to levied millage rate is 105% to 36.1%. These numbers are, again, they're making a big impression, and I say that making because we're still in process on this. They're making, as to what this really means, they're making a big impression on us. All right, let's set up something else that drills down just a little bit more. And that is we're going to basically look at the Jasper to county capital property tax burden at gross millage rate. We're going to look at the rollback per capita at the rollback rate. We're going to look at the actual tax burden at the levy rate. $766.74 versus $492.54 if there were no rollback. The rollback, the deduction itself, is $394.13 versus $130.55. So $394.13 per capita deducted from $766 will give you the $372, and you can see how the differences in the gross per capita amounts through the rollback flows down to what people are actually paying on the ground. So let's look at this a slightly different way, because we admit it's convoluted, but it's something that's important even though it's convoluted. So we got taxes at gross rates, rollback subtractions, local option sales tax. That's the way the setup is. So take a look at Jasper. We look at the county. 767, this is the per capita burden, 767, 394, 373, 492, 130, 362. The comparative numbers are straight across as it goes down to the bottom, the way, simple subtraction is done. And these are the differences, 275, 264, and 11, in terms of the differences between the rollback, the tax at gross rates, and then the difference between the tax burdens. So these are numbers that we, the Board of Commissioners and the staff, we just have to come to grips with this on our side as we go through this. The consultant, 767, 538, 229. 767 stays the same throughout all of this because that's the gross per capita based on the gross rate. So 538, 229. So the consultant's proposal would basically take the rollback from 394 to 130 to 538 versus 119. Now, the reason that we're not talking about anybody else in terms of Nelson or Talking Rock is because they didn't come in and present a presentation like we saw last week. So, let me show you the differences. You got a $155 swing on the bottom. 419 is the difference between the proposed rollback. The gross, again, stays the same. Now, at current, at the consultant, now, current point of view is, even the current situation, the BOC is not happy with. The consultant's proposal just increases the numbers. It causes the initial level of concern, and this believes this difference, the gap in these two, is at least in part subsidizes, different kinds of philosophies that represent different viewpoints. That does not mean that any city or any county can't have their viewpoint. That's what this is not. None of that's about. This is about how basically dollars shift around and what they may mean to that, and what people out there that do all these different viewpoints talk to us about all the time. So you got the current, you got the consultant. You're going to see a proposal from the Board of Commissioners here in a minute that has rates, and you're going to see what this does to the rates. And we'll go through this again, but the stop stays the same. 248 to 145 for the rollbacks. There is still $103, over $100 difference between the rollback in the city and the county. There's still an excess there. And then you see the bottom of the tax burden. All right, so the ratio rollback, 51.4, 26.4, 70.19, 24.19, and then 32.3, 29.47. All right, here we go. Loss distribution percentages. Loss distribution percentage produces the most equitable rollback for the totality of citizens from the perspective of the Board of Commissioners. The methodology, a formula of 3 equally rated factors for Jasper and the county. The first step is to determine Jasper's final loss distribution. The city would then calculate its distribution percentage, but must further adjust downward for the item 2 that you're about to see. There would be minimum loss distribution percentage provided in the BOC's model to Nelson and Talking Rock. We have policy reasons for this. The county subtracts Nelson's and Talking Rock's loss distribution percentages from step 2 from the percentage calculated in item 1 for its final loss distribution percentage. What that means is, because it's a policy matter for the county will subsidize and absorb the minimum that are provided to our two smaller cities. Three-factor formula, equal weighted factors. Total property ratios, total population ratios, and a point of sale and use ratio. Total property ratios. All right, we thought the best way to basically show this at a high level and keep this as short as it can be is basically looking at the net property from the tax digest, 274 million for Jasper to 1.6 billion, which is 1705, unincorporated is 1.3 billion to 1.6 billion, that's 81.5. Important note here is this ratio doesn't subordinate residential and agricultural property to commercial and industrial property. We saw part of the approach last week that basically put a premium on commercial and industrial property. We don't see any reason to put a premium on that at all. Everything should be basically equal between the residents and between all kinds of property. Source, net M&O digest. Total population ratio, simple, 12.3%, 85.5%. This comports with some of the numbers in the consultant's presentation last week. Here's an important point, and this also relates to the fact that there should be equality of treatment between residential and ag and commercial and industrial. Residential population creates the primary and most costly service demands. That's a quote. Where'd that come from? Last week's presentation on frame 11. Sources, 2020 U.S. Census and Consultant's PowerPoint, frame 11. Point of sale and use ratio. This is an extrapolation. Most of what was presented last week were really a lot of extrapolations. This is the only extrapolation we have because we want to give some credence to this notion of point of sale and use ratio. What this does is basically takes the percentage of Jasper's daytime population as was presented last week by the consultant and averages it with the regular population to get that number. And then the counties is this number. We'll say why we did that here. So the statute says the point of sale and use which generates the tax to be apportioned. The statute does not say the point of sale which generates the tax to be apportioned. Some of this is rooted in the nature of sales and use taxes and their interrelation with anything. But sort of a simple point is if Director Elrod here goes to Home Depot and buy $500 worth of merchandise and proceeds to his residents to basically use that merchandise, that's where we consider the point of use. We can get authority from all over the country in the context of sales and use tax law and case law to basically support that. So, item 2 in the constituent PPT. Why would we merge the two? Well, I mean, daytime population is something that was used in a couple of different ways. It wasn't used directly in the consultant's approach, but it's in some of the methodology points. And if we're trying to balance between the point of sale and the point of use, then basically taking the daytime population and giving that a role to play in this because of the increased daytime population, according to last week's presentation. That's basically the way we came up with it. Yeah, there's nothing statutory or anything in case law we can find that basically requires this to be done in any particular way or requires it to be used at all, as is the case with any ratio. I mean, any of these criteria just has to be considered. So, daytime population. BOC will recognize the relevance of the concept of daytime population in the consultant's calculations thereof at this point solely for the concessionary computation of the point and sale use ratios. Those are the three factors of the formula, equally weighted. We apply them. Okay, current, consulting, BOC. These are the distribution percentages. All right, current is 1.5 for Talking Rock, 2.8 for Nelson, 25.7 for Jasper, and 70 for the county. It's been around for a long time. The consultant would take Talking Rock from 1.5 to 0.04, would take Nelson from 2.8 to 1.2, would take the City of Jasper from 25.7 to 35.09, and would take the county from 70 to 63.8. And that totals 100, obviously. And it's a set of numbers. It's a set of numbers that the consultant is totally entitled to present, given the flexibility of the 8 criteria in the statute. Just as Nelson would be, just as Talking Rock would be, just as the Board of Commissioners is. It's all fair to put on the table. We just got to sort it out after it's on the table. So that was put on the table last week. This is what we're putting on the table in terms of BOC. We would take Talking Rock from 1.5 to 2. Again, we have policy reasons for this. We would take Nelson from 2.8 to 4. Jasper would go to 16.21 based on the methodology and how we, let's say, laid that out. The county would go to 77.79, which gives us 100. Now, that's what it is. We think that it's understandable, it's straightforward, it's compliant, it's realistic, and it's accommodative. And what we mean by that is it reflects the common sense nature of the residents of this county, and there's a ton of common sense in this county. It's straightforward. It doesn't conflate data from many sources, and which would be a stretch. The more data is conflated and brought in hypothetical situations, the more of a stretch it is. Compliant. It does satisfy the intent of the law. The overall approach we would offer satisfies both the service delivery strategy and loss components of the law. Realizing, again, we place a premium of importance on SDS, a little bit over loss. Reflects what's actually going on in the county in terms of who lives where, who owns what, giving a little some credence to the daytime population notion, and it respects different viewpoints and policies. Again, it's basically the distribution of money that can then be going to support the various policies in the jurisdiction. Now, that's basically a little bit of a flashback on the what the solution does to this notion of overall tax burdens, which you know, we admit we're still working through that as a concept and the applicability of it. In a regional context, every county is its own county, and like we started this, there's uniqueness to every county, but we do like to compare ourselves to peer counties, primarily from a financial standpoint, but also from other standpoints. So if we look at the peer counties that we look at, this is basically the distribution ratios in 11 counties, all of which have similarities, a lot of similarities, some of them, to Pickens County from the county level. And you can see where the current distribution rate is 70%, rolling on down from Dawson all the way down to White. And so Pickens County is positioned 9th on that table at 70. The consultant is still positioned 9th, but it goes down to 63.38. So that's basically how it says. You can see the averages there. Now those averages, 75.81 and the mean, 75.75. You see the Fannon's the mean on this one. The average is 75.81. That is calculated without calculating Pickens' number in there. Pull Pickens' number out of all of these and calculate the average. All right, so you can see the average there is 63.3. I mean, the real number would be 63.38 according to the consultant's proposal. That now drops Pickens 12 points, more than 12 points below the average. Now look what happens with the Board of Commissioners proposal. For whatever this is worth, Pickens becomes the median point, right in the middle of the 11 peer counties that we consider peer counties. That's it, folks. I appreciate y'all listening.
So we appreciate Bill going through and doing the drill down. I know that as we started doing the introduction, it shows that there is a tremendous divide, a continental divide between the approach that we're taking to take a look at this and the approach that was presented last week. In reality, I think that's because of the purpose of what loss exists to do. Loss is there to take property tax values and have them paid by sales tax versus property taxes. So when we do the slides and we show the presentation and our methodology, it's to show the difference of how much of a rollback is being received by residents in one area versus the residents in the other, and trying to balance that out, trying to find a way to bring that back to a fairly more equal. As you can see, there was still a $100 difference if you looked at it on a per capita ratio, that the City of Jasper residents still received a larger rollback per capita than what the county residents, but it does bring it to a much fair, in our opinion, much more fair line. I know for the purpose of the conversation today, we've laid out something that's completely different than what y'all laid out last week, and there may be time that's needed to digest with the week that we have next week coming up to come back to the table and review. But that is ours. We do have it all printed so that you can have a printed copy. And if you're taking notes, we do have a summary. It's 33 slides that gives you the summary, but it has all the approaches and the stances things. So from the county's perspective, we'll open the floor up to anybody who wants to speak.
Well, I'm David Sutton, of course, I'm the city attorney for the City of Jasper. Obviously, y'all had a week to study the presentation by Jasper. We'll probably take the week to study your presentation. I would say that at least in the factors that the county has brought up, it seems to me that, again, we'll need to study it, but it appears to weigh more heavily population. And of course, under the statutory law, which is O.C.G.A. 48-8-89, D2, population is not to be more heavily weighted than any other factor. On the service delivery strategy component, as Bill mentioned, we're to consider all 8 factors. And the statute again says shall, so you're supposed to consider all 8. So I don't know that you can reduce it down to 3 factors, 2 of which favor population in coming to a number. On service delivery strategy, in 2018, for good or ill, we all agreed that, hey, this is our service delivery strategy, and we all agreed to it, we all signed off on it, and we submitted it to the state, and it was approved by the state. So at least the agreement in place is what we're supposed to consider in doing our loss negotiation. I don't think that the city is opposed to considering service delivery strategy. I just don't think it can be done by December 30th. Because what you're talking about, if you do it right, you would have service districts for each service provided by each entity, and you'd have a millage calculation based upon what each entity provides. And as it's one of those things that sounds good, but from the county's viewpoint, I think probably 80% of your budget is police and fire. And so if we do individual service districts for police and fire, you know, in theory, Jasper would pay zero of that because we have our own fire department, our own police department. So it can be done, but it's complicated, and lost is complicated enough without trying to also renegotiate, you know, what, 20 plus different services, and trying to create a different service district for every service. And then you got to create subcategories, because Talking Rock and Nelson are different from Jasper. And so you're talking about something that's very, very complicated. Gwinnett County did it. It took them 3 lawsuits to get it right. And the county sued, and they took it to trial court judgment, but they didn't like the trial court judgment because Judge Barrett made them split it up as I described, and then they later settled out of court while it was in appeal. You know, there is a continental divide, I think, sort of in strategies that are just inherent in cities and counties. You know, one thing that I've heard is that the county, I think, is saying, hey, we want to be more rural. And you know, and that's fine, that's your philosophy, and you should have that philosophy, and it's fine you do. I just don't know that with a city that we have the same philosophy. And so if we are going to do this, I think we're going to have to agree that, you know, the county can't use SDS or loss to impose the county's philosophy on any of the cities. And, you know, one thing that sort of bothers me about your presentation, although it poo-poos the point of sale, you know, the point of sale is what we're dividing up. You know, if you don't have those sales, you don't have any taxes to divide up, and at least under the consultant's analysis, which, you know, y'all agree with him at least in part, you know, 70% of the sales tax is coming out of Jasper. And I found that number ironic because y'all are getting 70% of the lost proceeds. So, you know, although I understand you didn't like the numbers of the consultant, it could have been a heck of a lot worse. We could have said, hey, we generate 70% of the lost monies, and we think we ought to have what we generate, and you can keep what you generate. But at least, you know, the consultant tried to be fair in splitting that up, where the county is still getting the lion's share of the sales tax, even though the city generates the lion's share of the sales tax. You know, another way you could look at it is, you know, part of the comeback to that is, well, you know, the population is what spends the money, and the county has the population, so that money's coming from the county's population. But if you don't have a place to spend that money in Jasper or anywhere else in the county, then probably they do what all of us do. You order from Amazon, you know, or go out of county. You know, we could have taken the position that, hey, you know, we're at 25%, at least 20% of the sales tax is generated by tourism, maybe 30% of that. And again, that tourism, spending that money mostly in Jasper, you know, we could have asked for 45%. And again, you know, I just want to emphasize to y'all, we tried to be fair. Well, we didn't jump anywhere near that, you know, anywhere near 45. I will say that we understand this is a negotiation. We're looking at everybody's interest, just like the county wants to do. So we would look after Talking Rock and Nelson, and we thought we'd work that out, you know, as we come to some agreement. You know, you see, give me some legal authority. Well, on the service delivery strategy, what I hear you saying is we want an agreement to agree that we're going to renegotiate all this. And UNASBIL, an agreement to agree in Georgia is an invalid agreement. It's not a binding agreement in Georgia. So, you know, sure, we can have an agreement to agree because it's not going to bind us to anything legally. And so I don't know that that helps us. You know, part of the drift on this, and it's an undercurrent that I keep hearing, is, and you keep bringing it up in your goals and your strategy, that, hey, we want to be a rural county. And again, I think Jasper has no problem with that. But, you know, I don't know that you can impose that goal on Jasper. And I don't know that either SDS or the loss negotiation is the right vehicle to try to mandate that to Jasper. You know, the interesting thing to me is, you know, if you don't have growth, and I think Jasper's in agreement, we should have controlled growth, we shouldn't have rampant growth. Nobody wants to be Atlanta, nobody wants to be Gwinnett County. But, you know, at least from our philosophy, we rather live in an area that is growing than an area that is not growing. Just from a quality of life viewpoint. The other problem you got is if you don't grow, you know, where do your children live and where do your children work? Where do your grandchildren live? Where do your grandchildren work? So I think there's the one extreme of no growth, which is what I'm sort of hearing. And then there's the other extreme of Atlanta, and I don't think Jasper is either extreme. You know, we want some growth, and I think we're willing to talk about all that, but it's a different philosophy that I don't know that we're going to achieve by way of SDS or loss. And there are things you got to think about, like I said, is, you know, my children live near me, and that's great. You know, I get to see them. And if you don't have growth, then your children are not going to live near you. So there's some things there that we can have philosophical discussions about, but I don't know that we can do it by way of loss negotiation. I do agree that we probably need to look at the SDS. I don't know that we can make a decision on the loss distribution number based upon an agreement to agree to do SDS, because you're talking about something that's even more complicated than the loss negotiation. And you got to get it all done prior to December 30th. All those thoughts occurred to me just having heard that presentation. And I'm sure probably the rest of the negotiating team will probably have more thoughts. But I would like a copy of your presentation so that we can do the same thing y'all did and study it. I heard some complaint that we threw up a number. Well, at the end of the day, the distribution certificate has got to have a number. They don't want you to talk about SDS. They want you to fill out that one-page form that says, we're going to divide up loss by these percentages. So I don't know how you negotiate without a number. So that, just didn't make a lot of sense to me. These are just all thoughts off the top of my head. I do think we need to talk. I do think, though, that to try to set preconditions that we're going to agree to how we do the complicated SDS strategy in deriving the loss distribution certificate percentage number, I just don't see how we could do that. It'd take you a month just to do law enforcement alone. And take you another month to talk about fire service and mutual aid and everything else going on. Planning and zoning is a service. We do our own planning and zoning. Y'all do your planning and zoning. So some things will be easy, but to try to roll it into the loss negotiation at this point in time, when we already, have an agreement that we all agreed to and all signed off on, it's what's in place and what's contemplated that we would use in the negotiations. So I may have talked too much, but...
Thank you, David. Mr. Mayor, I said I didn't want to say nothing, but David's brought some things to my mind I'd like to comment on if I may. All right. Well, first of all, I was very pleased to see the word collaboration in the county's agreement or in their proposal. Because anybody that's followed politics in the last 6 years knows that that's always been my strategy. And I've used the word to the point where it's pleasing that other people are using it now. And I will take a great deal of responsibility for initiating that strategy. Dating back to 2016 and then in 2018, we actually met virtually every leader in our community got together and had a collaborative strategy planning meeting. And Ian, that wasn't your seat, that was Rob's seat at the time, and we all agreed that there were a couple things that we needed to do, and one of them was get along better, meaning the city and the county. And I also want to say that I understand service delivery very well. I understand the way, historically, the way it's gotten to this point. And so it's not that I don't understand the position that y'all have stated. And I also say that I've been a very strong proponent of IGAs and have tried my best on multiple occasions to get those put in place, knowing that historically they were not there. But when we signed those service delivery strategies in our comprehensive plan, and I was at the comprehensive plan, the insinuation has been that nobody at the table was there. I was there for almost every meeting. That Form 2 that you sign when you send it to the PCA, that is an IGA legally. And so that's my understanding. And so we have those IGAs in place. I think the complexity is overwhelming. I would love to look at it. Mayor and I have had conversations about service delivery and how it evolved and what the solutions are. And so that, by any means, what happens moving forward, I don't want to say that that's not on the table. I want to reach out to our sister cities and tell you that that was our consultant. He was disparaged, in my opinion, just a little bit today because we chose him and we listened to what he said and we supported his position. And I understand his position. And he's my consultant. And unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. But I want you to know, we understand he's not your consultant. So I could understand where you would stand and say, well, golly, that Jasper just wants to stick it to us. That's not what we want. We understand that Talking Rock and Nelson are different than Jasper. But we've taken a scientific approach, at least in our opinion. And we at this point, defend our strategy, not to disparage yours. But I just want you to know that we didn't expect y'all to jump up and down last week when we presented the numbers. But I'll tell you what, in the first meeting, we had the courage to present those numbers before we knew where anybody else stood. We didn't have time to go back and see what was on the table and then come back and challenge it. Thanks, sir.
So for the city, we're going to rest today and go back and do our due diligence for next week. I want to reiterate to the public at large that I've reached out to both mayors of Nelson and Talking Rock and reiterate to them that in no way does our position reflect where yours will wind up with the county, and certainly we will support in any way that we can whatever position that you come up with. So that being said, we have another meeting scheduled, Mr. Chair, I think next Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the same location. And we look forward to meeting back together again. We understand this is a process, and we're going to go through this process together. At the end of it, I anticipate that this city and this county and these cities and this county will all still be together. I will be sort of disappointed if that does not work out that way. So thank you.
Thank you. Very much. You guys have anything? Well, thank you.